House of Representatives has passed the Violent Radicalization and Homegrown Terrorism Prevention Act by a 404 to 6 vote. 404 to 6 vote.
HR1955, as I understand it, provides a basis for subjective interpretation of dissident speech that allows those in power to criminally penalize anything they consider to be particularly effective in terms of galvanizing an opposition that might conceivably, in some sense, disrupt or destabilize the status quo.
A dramatic warning here at home to tell you about the Department of Homeland Security tonight, telling law enforcement agencies that homegrown right-wing extremist groups are growing. They're gaining strength, according to the report, by exploiting fears about President Obama's race, as well as fears about the economy.
When I looked up the word force in the online dictionary, there were a few definitions that put the word in perspective in relation to the definition of homegrown terrorism as given in HR 1955. The Violent Radicalization and Homegrown Terrorism Prevention Act of 2007. To put it plainly, the definitions of force in this context were frightening. Section 899A3 of the bill defines homegrown terrorism as a term meaning the use, planned use, or threatened use of force or violence by a group or individual born, raised, or based within the United States to intimidate or coerce the United States government, its population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. The very first thing I noticed when I read this passage of the bill was that the words force and violence were separated by or, meaning that their definition of force meant something other than violence. I was curious. If force didn't mean violence, then what did it mean? I'm very concerned about what I came up with. The first and second definitions didn't make any sense in regards to the bill, being that both definitions implied violence, and the bill clearly meant force to be something other than violence. The third and fourth definitions, however, gave me goosepimples. The third definition defined force as A, intellectual power or vigor, especially as conveyed in writing or speech, and C, a capacity for affecting the mind or behavior, as in the force of logical argument. Imagine defining homegrown terrorism as the use, planned use, or threatened use of intellectual power or vigor, or defining it as the use, planned use, or threatened use of a logical argument. Neither of those sound right. They'd both be ridiculous interpretations of the word force in this context. I don't like to think that that's what the authors of this bill mean, but I have seen a great deal of this kind of thinking being broadcast on mainstream networks, almost as though we were being softened up for this kind of thinking. I'll give you an example.
It was omitted. Building 7 9/11 report omitted. The entire thing, never in the history of the world has a building fallen from a fire into its own footprint, eliminating the core, 25 steel beams. Really impossible, physics-wise, impossible.
Historically, have governments ever faked incidents or incited incidents in order to get them into wars? Nations.
Has that
happened historically?
I'm sure it has.
Now for the top story tonight, freedom of speech versus dangerous conduct. In addition to the O'Donnell rhetoric, we now have public servants like Secretary of State Rice being accosted by loons. As stated, this kind of behavior is flat out dangerous and will lead to violence if not checked. This stuff is now spreading because of people like O'Donnell and the loony website. Every American should condemn these people, and I will tell you, I'm going to make this prediction, if they're not reined in by the authorities, and they should be, that terrible intrusion in San Francisco should have been a criminal activity there.
While O'Reilly isn't calling it homegrown terrorism, and he shouldn't either, because it absolutely is not, he is, however, calling for one of the aforementioned definitions of force to be criminalized, and he is relating it directly to free speech. It would seem to be that it is O'Reilly's position that the exercise of free speech can and will lead to violence, and that it should be criminalized.
Apparently, Nancy Pelosi agrees with Bill O'Reilly.
Well, I think we all have to take responsibility for our actions and our words. We are a free country, and this balance between freedom and safety is one that we have to carefully balance. I have concerns about some of the language that is being used, because I saw this myself in the late 70s in San Francisco. This kind of rhetoric was very frightening, and it created a climate in which violence took place. And so I wish that we would all, again, curb our enthusiasm in some of the statements that are made, so understanding that some of the people, the ears that it is falling on, are not as balanced as the person making the statement might assume. But again, our country is great because people can say what they think and they believe. But I also think that they have to take responsibility for any incitement that they may cause.
So, there it was, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House of Representatives of the United States of America, calling for the criminalization of free speech by directly relating it to violence and suggesting that those who speak words that incite others should be held responsible. Listen to that last part again.
They have to take responsibility for any incitement that they may cause.
Citing facts in relation to an opinion would fall under the force of logical argument, a criminalized activity according to one of the more ridiculous interpretations of the word force in relation to homegrown terrorism.
So, even while attempting to criminalize free speech with their race baiting, MSNBC, NBC, GE, and Chris Matthews could all be charged with HR1955 for domestic terrorism for this segment, among others.
These kinds of things.
Well, let's make this connection. Gerald, you and I agree on a lot of things. It seems to me the oddness is the atmospherics. A communist sympathizer like Lee Harvey Oswald, who had become disillusioned with Soviet communism but was infatuated with Castro, kills in the atmosphere of right-wing hatred of a lefty, even though he's a lefty, if you will. What is it that triggers? Is it the sense that the whole atmosphere is, this guy's not legitimate? The guy I'm about to shoot, or the guy I'm about to humiliate with carrying a gun, or with a sign, or yelling out, you lie. That sort of license that's given by the atmospherics. Explain.
Absolutely. Chris, you hit the nail on the head. It's a license that allows somebody who's on the edge to cross the edge from thinking about acting out to actually crossing the line and being violent and thinking they can change history with a single bullet. And we've shown time and time again that that's possible.
What is this? What is this thing out there?
There are some people out there, some small sliver of the population, who feel, you know, what the brave young warriors ought to do is go out there and defend the white race, and that may very well mean taking a shot at the president.
I wonder if it isn't the atmosphere of language that's being used today.
Citing facts in relation to their opinion of what causes an individual to commit violent actions is an attempt to get the government to change the policy on free speech, and is a direct violation of HR 1955 and can, under it, be considered domestic terrorism. And maybe it is. For these and other people, networks, and companies are terrorizing the public with fear by spreading their opinion that violence is caused by free speech.
And that may very well mean taking a shot at the president.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.